The White House says President Biden's massive infrastructure plan will be a game changer for many states. It's expected to fund much-needed improvements and new construction projects around the country. But despite the legislation, the president is still facing a low approval rating. Recent polls show it has dropped to just 41%. So joining us now to discuss is White House Principal Deputy Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. Karine, it's great to see you.
It's great to see you. Thank you so much for having me. Great to see you as always.
So let's talk about Build Back Better and infrastructure. We know that the president believes in these policies. He's traveling around the country to tout their benefits. Democrats say that the plans are popular. So on one hand, you've got the president's low approval rating, and on the other, you've got the infrastructure plan, which which most people in this country, bipartisan, seem to like. So what is the president's message to people who say that he's not doing a good job, even though they like the infrastructure plan?
Well, let me first say Happy Infrastructure Week, because that is something that we have been hearing for some time, for the last several years, and it never happened. And here you have President Joe Biden, who delivered that. And I think the key thing when we talk about the infrastructure, it was bipartisan. The president reached across the aisle, which was one of the reasons why he was elected, and delivered something that was bipartisan. To your point, it was very popular to modernize our roads and bridges and tunnels, but also deal with some real issues that families are dealing with. When you think about broadband and that digital divide, making sure that families across the country, regardless if you're on the East Coast, West Coast, green, not green, a red state, a blue state, that you have that affordable internet, as well as clean water, which is something that many families have dealt with, getting that lead out of our water and making sure our children are drinking clean water. So many things that are really key, and also creating good paying jobs, union jobs. So that is one part of the president's economic policy that he's talked about for some time. The other piece, which is what you mentioned, Vlad, is the Build Back Better Act, which is also very popular, and the president wants to deliver. It's going to work closely with Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer to make sure that it gets to his desk and it's signed. And we're talking about things that are so critical: elder care, child care, universal pre-K, making sure housing is affordable. All of these things are going to be paid for. It's not going to add a cent to the deficit, and making sure that the wealthy among us pay their fair share. So all of this is so critical as we try to move the country forward and not leave anybody behind. And so here's the thing: we say the components of these legislations are popular. This is what the American people want to see. And so what the president's trying to do is making sure that he delivers, and that is what's so important.
So, Karine, if he is delivering on what people want, why are his approval ratings so low?
Well, I'll say this, Anne-Marie, it's not unusual for a president traditionally to see in their first year for their approval numbers to go down. That's not something that is, unheard of, if you will. But, we know that the president came into this position with multiple crises, and he's taken them head on. You think about COVID-19 and the pandemic. We now have 80% of Americans who have at least one shot in arms, 70% of Americans that are fully vaccinated, and that's because the president took action on day one. A year ago, there were no vaccine. Nobody was getting vaccinated yet. And now here we are with those high numbers, and we got to continue to do the work. And we're seeing an economy that's turning back on, 5.6 million jobs. We just heard yesterday that there was they re-looked at the numbers, and we have 710,000 more jobs that was predicted, that were seen from the last 4 months. That's so important. That's added to the 5.6 million. So all of these things matter. Now, we still have work to do. We understand that people are still feeling the squeeze, but the president's going to continue to work. That's why he's trying to get to this Build Back Better Act as well, which is going to lower cost for families.
Karine, let's talk about COVID. It's not just COVID that people are going to be talking about at Thanksgiving. It's also the rising cost of food and fuel that is top of mind for many Americans, and of course, holiday shopping soon to follow. And it's these poll numbers that the president is facing. It doesn't just come from Republicans. These are poll numbers. They're polling Democrats and independents here. And despite some of the numbers that you pointed out of the economy, the falling unemployment, the stock market, which is doing as good as it's ever done, 6 in 10 Americans say the president hasn't accomplished much after 10 months in office, and they blame him. 70% 70% rate the economy negatively. So what's the president doing to address the issue of inflation? And some have said that the Democrats are not good at messaging. The previous administration, every time the stock market went up, the former president tweeted about it and took to the podium to brag about it. We don't hear that from Democrats or from President Biden.
Well, I think we're going to continue, as far as messaging, we're going to continue to see what the president did the last 2 days, which is going into states. He went to New Hampshire, Woodstock, New Hampshire, visited a bridge, as you all know, and talked about how the bipartisan infrastructure bill is going to help that particular bridge and use that as an example for other infrastructure and bridges across the country. He went to Detroit, Michigan yesterday and talked about electric vehicles. Another key component of both of those pieces of legislation that we are talking about this morning is going to have a real effect on climate change. So he's going to continue to do that. He's going to crisscross the country. The vice president's going to do that. The cabinet officials are going to do the same. And you're going to keep hearing from us that drumbeat about what these two pieces of legislation, one clearly has passed, one that we're working on, is going to really give the American families some breathing room, as the president talks about. Look, there's still a lot of work to do. We understand that the American people, they're tired. They've been dealing with COVID for the past year and a half. We get that. The president understands that. He understands the squeeze that the families are feeling with prices rising. He's from Scranton, Pennsylvania, something that he understands very personally. But look, he has been working very closely with businesses, with unions, with other companies and key players on the supply chain, which is what's causing a lot of this increase in prices, and trying to make sure that we bring these costs down. And we're seeing actually some good results from the work that the president has done. So he's going to continue to answer these questions for the American public in the short term and the long term. So we're just going to continue to do the work.
So I want to get you to clear the air about something. There's been a few news organizations out there reporting that there's friction inside the vice president's office. She spoke earlier on Good Morning America. I want to play a little of what she had to say.
We're getting things done, and we're doing it together.
So you don't feel misused or underused?
No, I don't. I am very, very excited about the work that we have accomplished, but I am also absolutely clear-eyed that there is a lot more to do, and we're going to get it done.
All right, so we saw some photos of the president and vice president looking pretty chummy after she returned from Europe. What's really going on here?
Well, there's a lot of gossip here in Washington, D.C., and we're just not going to pay attention to it or really lean into it at all, because what we know and what we have said and what the president has said, the vice president is a partner in this with him. She's the first in the room, the last in the room. We would not have been able to get the bipartisan infrastructure done without her leadership. Again, she's going to be out there just like the president is in making sure we're talking directly to the American public, and he has complete confidence in her. He trusts her. She thinks she's done a great job, and that is what matters. And we wouldn't be able to deliver what we've been delivering: the American Rescue Plan, making sure people get their shots in arms, making sure the economy is running again, and delivering on this bipartisan infrastructure bill without the leadership of this vice president, of Vice President Kamala Harris. She's been an amazing leader, a partner in this with him, and that is what matters, not the gossip that we're hearing inside the Beltway.
Karine, before we let you go really quickly, I want to ask you about something that's sort of near and dear to my heart, and I know perhaps yours as well. The situation in Haiti with those missionaries that have been kidnapped. They are still in captivity. I note that Secretary Blinken said that the president was receiving briefings on the situation in Haiti. What more can you tell us?
As you know, it is a point of privilege for me, very personal, as you know, Vlad, and it is devastating to see what's going on in the country. But the president has said the Haitian people, they are friends of ours. They are a relationship that's incredibly important to him, and so we're going to continue to grow that relationship. To the folks who are there, who are sadly in a difficult situation right now. I can't speak to that. That is something that the State Department and is following closely. The president is being updated, as you just said, Vlad, regularly, and so I can't speak to that right now here from this position. But clearly, like I said, we're being updated. The president's being updated, and it's something that we're watching very closely and monitoring.
Karine Jean-Pierre, thanks for giving us time and a little extra time.
More than we
I appreciate that.
Anytime.
Anytime. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Karine.